Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the channel. My name is Dan Kwan. I'm a full stack software developer. I work primarily with startups, early stage startups building out what's called MVPs, minimum viable products, typically web software, SaaS products, iPhone apps, things of that sort. I've been doing that now for about 7 years. And then what I do in this channel is I try to go through some of those experiences and recount what my clients have done well and some of the mistakes they've made along the way. Hopefully in an effort to save you some of these headaches if you're trying to figure out this whole tech industry and how to navigate your way through it. So today I'm starting a new series where I describe how software projects go wrong. There are many ways that software projects get totally derailed, sometimes sabotaged altogether. And I've seen it happen a few times, and the main thing is that a lot of these patterns I see repeated, I see over and over again. So what that means is that they're generally preventable. If you can anticipate it, you can prevent it, usually. So I'm starting a series about that, and in this particular video, I'm going to describe one situation where a company or a startup hires only junior devs and no senior dev. This typically happens with a startup or a team that has only non-technical people, and they're trying to save money. They're operating on a shoestring budget, and they figure a bunch of junior developers, 2 or 3 junior devs, can do it, can get the job done. Sometimes they can, but it's very rare. So typically this is a decision made from trying to save money. And that I've never really seen it work out, in person at least. So typically what happens is I'm just checking my notes here, the startup or the founder will recruit a developer from a university environment, either grad school or undergrad. Sometimes it might be what's called a coding boot camp, but the thing about coding boot camps is that the typical student there is older, late 20s, maybe early 30s. So those students are generally looking for more full-time traditional roles, whereas at the college, undergrad, and graduate level, students might have time. They might be working on, they're not working full time right now. They don't have the pressure of getting a full-time job right away. So they might be willing to take on a project on the side or something like that. So that's how it generally happens. So yeah, while students are in school, they're open to more sort of non-traditional roles of that sort. From the startup's point of view, the numbers are pretty obvious. You might have a professional developer in the United States. Let's say it's a contract engineer like myself. I might be billing something like $150 an hour, which is pretty standard in Silicon Valley and New York City. But a college kid might be charging like 25 or 30 bucks an hour. So it's a pretty drastic difference. And so to a founder, it's a very compelling reason to take on an undergrad. Or a graduate student, let's just call it a student, as your initial development team. And maybe they only hire 1 student or 2 students and that's it. That's the entire development team. And that's not unusual at the early stages. Unfortunately, what often happens is the scope of the project ends up sort of spiraling out of control. Next thing you know, the founders or the founding team wants more features, or there are all sorts of bugs that nobody anticipated. All sorts of scenarios that people aren't properly anticipating, and the project spirals out of control, and then it crashes and burns, or they have to hire a senior team to take it over. So that's what happens. So let's get into why this happens. So the problem with this setup is that if you have a founding team of non-technical founders and a dev team of students, you have nobody in there with actual real-world industry experience in the technical field. So you kind of have a blind leading the blind situation, and nobody's actually experienced the software development cycle in a professional capacity. And so you have, like I said, sort of a blind leading the blind. And so the thing is, the founder, of course, he or she wouldn't know that, right? He wouldn't know what to expect, and they tend to assume that the development student, the student, would be able to handle whatever situation comes up, and that they can learn it on the job. And the student oftentimes also has the same sort of assumptions. Whatever problem comes up, they can learn on the job. So that's what I mean by blind leading the blind. And unfortunately, in a lot of university curriculum, curricula, they don't really teach industry-specific skills. And one of the ways I know that is because when my clients have hired like summer interns in whatever company I'm working on over the summer, the students have sort of, I hate to say glaring gaps in their knowledge, but pretty common gaps across a lot of university students. So one typical example is a lot of university CS departments don't teach what's called version control, or what's called Git, G-I-T, Git. Within the industry, that's basically a required knowledge. If you don't know Git or any kind of version control at all, you need to be trained up. You need to go back and learn all those things, and that's one common scenario. Another common scenario is something called test-driven development. Some universities do teach that, a lot of them don't. A lot of it boils down to just the languages they teach. A lot of my startups that I've worked with use a language called JavaScript. And in colleges and universities, oftentimes the beginner language is C++ or Java, which is not JavaScript. And so they have a lot of things to catch up on. And so what tends to happen with a situation where you have a university student building out like the initial product is they're using what they know. So they might build out something in Java rather than JavaScript, or maybe like Python, which is something they should use, but because they don't know it, they're going to build it out in Java or maybe C++ even. And you end up with a situation where you're building it, you're kind of tripping out of the gate. Right off the bat, you're building something unconventional, and it's going to spiral out of control, and you're going to have a hard time kind of maintaining it. So let's see. So what tends to happen, even if the student builds out the code base using sort of a conventional stack, what's called a stack, like JavaScript or Python, let's say the student goes in and tries to build it out using a conventional stack of that sort. What tends to happen is all these problems and situations come up that he or she did not anticipate. And so they have to go through a cycle of Googling the situation, trying to find a solution, implementing the solution, fixing the bugs, doing it all over again, because that's going to create another set of bugs, and then Googling again, and then so forth and so on. You end up in this sort of rinse, wash, repeat cycle of constantly chasing down bugs, putting out fires, which all of a sudden starts other fires, and then so forth and so on. And then this becomes very, very cumbersome after a while. Most developers are not keen on doing this kind of work, and certainly not students. So that's what tends to happen. So this actually reminds me of a book I read in college called Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis is a very famous author. He's actually much more well known for a couple other books like The Big Short or Moneyball. He wrote Moneyball, but way before all that, he wrote a book called Liar's Poker, in which he describes his experiences working at an investment bank during the 80s called Salomon Brothers. This was during like the mid to late 80s, like the Michael Milken period of finance. And so he worked at Salomon Brothers, and he described the situation where, forgive me if I don't have this exactly accurately because I haven't read the book in a long time, but he described the situation in which these trading firms, financial trading firms, would assign accounts to junior traders that they didn't really care about. So they would knowingly hand an account to a junior trader, knowing that the junior trader would mess it up. And they called that like a blow-up account, I think, or a blow-up. He blew up the account is how they would phrase that. And they would do that on purpose because they had a handful of accounts, of clients that they were not high profile. So they gave them to the juniors to blow up, to get all the mistakes out of the way, to learn all the mistakes, all the things that can go wrong, all the traps, so that when they have a more important account, a more high-profile client, they have that experience already under their belt. That's a pretty scary way to think about it if that's your money. But oftentimes, for a junior dev, you essentially have a blow-up contract or a blow-up client. And I certainly had a couple of those where I just royally messed it up. And the primary beneficiary of those situations were me. I learned a lot, but my client didn't walk away happy. So that happens a lot with the whole junior dev situation. I was that junior dev once, is kind of what I'm trying to say. So that's that. Another reason why the situation is hard to sort of maintain is because just general life gets in the way, especially for students. Students are busy, right? They have class, they have midterm exams, final exams, whatever extracurriculars they're doing. They have girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. Greek life, maybe sport. Stuff gets in the way. And a common thing I've noticed amongst students in general is that they tend to underestimate how busy they are. So they tend to overcommit to things. So sort of the motivated ones, like the students who are trying to take on a lot, they'll take on a lot thinking they can handle or they have enough time. And in reality, they find out like, oh, I'm busier than I thought. Like I can't maintain all of this. And really what it is that the student might, under ideal circumstances, the student might be correct. If the circumstances were perfectly ideal, they might be able to handle all of it. That could be it. But the problem is for software projects, it is almost never ideal. 99.9%. There are going to be all sorts of crazy crashes and the server goes down or the database went out or whatever. And these things are just going to happen in every major software project. Every project of any real consequence, this is going to happen. And so the student really might not be anticipating that because they don't have enough experience. They don't have the frame of reference to understand this going in. So what happens is these projects, there's all sorts of bugs and crazy fires constantly getting in the way. And then life gets in the way. You got final exams coming up. You got to travel home for holidays and all this stuff. And then, that kind of work is already not very enjoyable. So the student starts to think, do I really want to do this? Is this really what I want to keep on doing with what little free time I have is just chasing down bugs and trying to figure out why it's crashing over here on the iPhone but not on the Android, or why is it, why does it work on Chrome but not Safari, but it does work on Safari if you're on the West Coast, like all sorts of crazy stuff like that. People don't want to be doing that. Really what they want to do is build, software developers at least. So once life starts getting in the way for a student, they start to think, I don't really have time for this. This really isn't for me. I misjudged. And then they just leave. They just, they say, I can't do this anymore, or some of them just stop returning phone calls and stuff like that. It can get that bad. So let's see here. And last but not least, so let's say, despite all that, you were somehow able to identify a student who is qualified at a professional level. So not all students fit the description that I'm describing. There are students who just study and work on projects on their own, and they already know what areas they need to be focusing on to be professionally ready. There are students like that, and they just learn all this stuff on their own. And so there are students who come out of school, college or grad school, who do know Git, who do know version control, who do know AWS, who do know how to create a REST API and using JavaScript rather than whatever language they teach in the college. And so that person is an ideal target. Let's say the startup manages to find or stumbles across one of these people and somehow convinces that person to join this project, either on an equity basis or some sort of cut rate. That could work out. That's actually, if that happens, you kind of got lucky, kind of hit the jackpot on that. However, what's inevitably going to happen for an individual like this is they're going to, at some point summer's going to roll around, it's going to be spring semester, February, March, April, they're going to be applying to internships at pretty prestigious companies like Amazon, like Facebook, like Apple. And if they really are qualified, they're going to get a lot of offers. And Apple might offer an internship to that student at literally 15 times what you're paying him, if you're paying him at all. Sometimes it might be just equity, vesting equity, over like a 3-year vesting schedule. And then what is the student going to do, right? Obviously, the obvious choice is to take the internship, unless you are paying him an obscene amount of money, which of course you wouldn't be because that defeats the whole purpose. So if you do find someone who kind of fits that bill, it won't be long before the other companies find that student as well. and then you kind of up a creek. That's actually exactly what happened to one of my current clients. It's a startup in the UK, and the only difference is they weren't students, they were contractors, and then they built out sort of a half-baked product. And it's two guys, and then they both ended up getting hired by Facebook at crazy high salaries. And so they were like, all right, see you later. I'm not working on this startup anymore. And then they came across me. This was about 6 months ago or so. And now I'm just billing hours on the contract. I'm not like a co-founder or anything like that. I don't want any part of that. I just bill it by the hours. So I'm actually currently kind of experiencing the residual of that situation. Right? I'm the replacement for that now. So that's what happened. And that's, if you do find a student who, like I said, who fits that profile, it's not going to be long before other companies find that student. Companies with deep pockets, really deep pockets, like the Amazons and the Googles, and then they're going to offer crazy high salary right out the gate. First year salary for a dev out of that caliber, let's say from a great institution like Cal Berkeley or someplace like that, like a U Michigan or someplace like that, it's going to be easily 6 figures, easily. It's the first year out of college, so that's going to be tough to compete with. And generally, startups try to compete with stuff like equity, options, on a 4-year schedule. That's just not going to do it. It's hard to convince a 23-year-old just out of college, hey, why don't you come work for me for free or for these magic shares of equity that may or may not materialize. So that's what happens a lot, and so there's no real solution there other than to offer a lot of money, and even then it might not work out. So so the general conclusion here is that if you're hiring a student because you're trying to save money, if you're only hiring junior devs, you're going to be up a creek pretty soon. What you're going to need is a senior dev to essentially oversee the junior dev, which again kind of defeats the purpose, because then you're not saving money on the senior dev, right? So it's sort of a catch-22. The issue here is one of motivation. Like what even motivates a junior dev to join a certain company at all? Like why would a junior dev, like a student at a university, join one company versus another company? Besides just money. Like if one company is offering just an obscene amount of money, well then yeah, take it. But let's say the money, all else being equal, really what junior devs are motivated by is being in a situation where they can see a clear path to becoming a senior dev. So they want to work under senior leadership. They want to work under teams that have strong senior development leadership, and will be, so that the junior dev will be guided into a senior role eventually. And even if that doesn't happen, they can at least learn from the senior dev team, and then maybe start their own company, or the next job they take, they'll have a lot more senior level skill. That's really what they want. So, the good ones at least, the good ones. The bad ones really just do want money. So if you're talking to a person who just is always asking about money, like how much money this, how much money that, it's probably not a good developer. So the good ones want like that sort of path, that glide path into a senior role. A clearly defined one, like I'm going to be working under this guy, and I'll do that for 2 years, and then I'll work under this team for 2 years, etc. So that's the intrinsic motivation of the good developers in general, really, and that's true from day one. So that's the intrinsic motivation, as I was just saying. So I'm just making sure I cover all my key points here. So if your startup or your project only has a junior dev, or maybe you're only hiring one and he's a junior dev, they're not going to see that clear path. That path won't be there. So by that fact alone, you might only be attracting people who only need the money. Like that's their only motivation, and those are not your best developers. So that right off the bat, you're already filtering out the best entry level developers. So, and then of course the project goes sideways, things go wrong, you get all sorts of technical debt, you get all sorts of crazy bugs, whatever. And then you can either buy your way out of it, which I've seen a couple companies do, or it kills the company, which I've seen happen more often. sometimes the company can buy their way out of it if they have enough sort of cash in their war chest. They can just sort of scrap out and start over. But all the money you spent on the junior dev is now gone. The whole code base is gone. You're starting over, and then you spend all this money that you would have spent already if you had just done it the same way the first time, hiring a dev shop or a senior dev or whatever. So that's it. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that I just don't recommend that kind of arrangement where you're hiring a junior dev exclusively to build out your initial product. The only scenario where I think that will be okay is if what you're building out is exceedingly simple. Just really, really simple stuff, like a landing page for like a dog walking service. Like, yeah, a junior dev can handle. You can probably just do that on WordPress. But that kind of thing could work. Something really, really simple. Maybe just like a basic, what's called the CRUD application, C-R-U-D, CRUD. Like a really simple CRUD application. And that's it. And even then, like a lot of junior devs would still mess that up. So that's the only case where I would be mildly okay with it. But generally, it's not a good arrangement. And if like I said earlier, I haven't really seen it work, at least in my personal experience. One last thing I forgot to point out. In the case of the junior dev who's actually pretty good, who already knows all the professional skills, is that by and large, people like that are already working on their own project anyway. So they'll have like 2, 3, 4 of their own things going on. So if your project eventually becomes sort of a mess, it becomes just dealing with a lot of bugs and putting out fires, most junior devs will just end up, most devs of real skill, real quality, will just end up just working on their own stuff and just building out their own thing. So I forgot to add that in my last one. So that's for the case of junior students who are pretty good, who do know the right areas of the stack in a professional context, etc. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, I really wouldn't recommend it. And yeah, that's it. So stay tuned for the next video where I'll discuss other ways that software projects kind of go wrong and that I've at least personally seen. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully you got some value out of this. If you have any questions or comments, leave it in the comment section below, and I'll answer whatever I can. Thanks.